Ever wondered how a wildlife photograph actually comes together? In this video, I'm sharing 3 photographs I captured at King's Camp recently. I'll show you how I chose them from a sequence of shots, the key camera settings behind each one, and how the raw files compare to the final edits. There are 3 truths that shape how I decide which photo makes it through my editing process, and they might just change the way you look at your own images. Let's take a look at the first shot. This first sequence of photographs is of a female leopard. Now, she was sitting in quite a lot of shade, and you can see in this sequence of images, I waited for her to almost give a little bit more interest into what she was looking at. So in this first shot here, she's not really looking at anything. There's also a strong bit of sunlight on the top of the head. Now, this next image, she did pay a little bit of interest towards her left-hand side and to my right-hand side. And I liked the pose, and I liked this branch coming into the face. It really does give a sense of the wilderness here, but I don't like this very strong sunlight on the top of the head. So here I really thought about what to do, and I thought getting rid of that sunlight would probably work well for this image. I tried zooming in a little bit on this third frame. I tried zooming out a little bit, trying to get all the head in, but that very bright sunlight was very distracting. So in these last 2 images here, I decided to focus in a little bit more. Now this is the frame that I ended up with, and I chose this frame over this second one here for a very specific reason. The whiskers on this right-hand frame here are being cut off, and also this branch is very, very close to the top of the head here. And I felt like this image definitely needed the full spread of whiskers, and also I don't want that small branch to be very close to the edge of the frame. I don't like that the ear has been clipped off on this left-hand side, but I think that is the small compromise that I went for. On the right-hand side here, I did try to zoom in a little bit to get rid of that small area there, but in doing that, I cut off the whiskers there. So this is the frame that I ended up with. Now, in terms of camera settings, this leopard was sitting in the shade with that very bright patch of sunlight in the top of the frame. And because the leopard was very static, I didn't need a very sharp shutter speed. Although I was shooting at 600mm at f6.3, the shutter speed I chose was 1/800th of a second. And because I use auto ISO, that gave me an ISO reading of 1600. I did dial in some negative exposure compensation just to adjust for the very bright sections that were at the top of the frame, and the belly of the leopard here in the background was actually also quite bright. So that was the reason for that negative exposure compensation. If we look at the edit here, let's have a look at the crop first. There was a few considerations here. I didn't want to get rid of the whiskers. I wanted those whiskers included in the shot. I don't like that small patch of grey there. I wish the ear covered that, and I wish I didn't clip the ear there. But again, that's just a small compromise. I like this branch coming in through the face here, and I didn't want this branch to come out the exact corner. So if I cropped it like that, it just makes the image look a little bit strange and almost forced, if that makes sense. So I chose just to let the branch come in a little bit away from that corner there. And I wanted the eye on roughly a third here, or the eye and the branch, because that is the main focus in this image. Although it's the subject that is the main focus, that branch also tells a little bit of a story here in the image. So I chose to almost put the branch and the eye on that third there. Now, in terms of what I did with the edits, this is the raw file before. You can see in the edited file, I've added a little bit of a warm glow to the leopard's face. I've definitely accentuated a lot of the eye detail there. There's the raw file. I also darkened the corners here and added a soft blue tint to the shadows. I also desaturated some of these greens here just to let the orange color of the leopard shine through a little bit more. I added some clarity to the main subjects in this image, which is the face and that branch there. That is the raw file again. So you can see a very subtle adjustment, but I feel like it adds a little bit of mood to the image. Definitely brings forward more of a connection with the subject. If you look at the raw file, that belly is very bright there. And if we just zoom out to 6%, you can see that's a very dominant part of this frame for me. It's very eye-catching. So I decided to rather emphasize the main part of the subject. Again, that's the branch and the eye there. Wants to learn my complete Lightroom editing system? I've put together a free 7-day email course that shows you exactly how I approach every wildlife photograph from start to finish. It's practical, easy to follow, and you can start today. Just sign up using the link below. This next image was of a different female leopard, and this leopard gave us really great opportunities for photography. And she climbed a tree and we moved the vehicle to get a good view of her face. So you can see in this sequence of shots, I wanted a nice portrait of this leopard. I went in quite close with 600 millimeters. And you can see from the sequence of shots, I started out with her resting on her arm. She was looking around. She was fairly active. She was definitely looking for prey to hunt. So she wasn't sleeping at all. So I knew that she would be lifting her head from time to time and looking around. And I really wanted a very specific shot. So you can see this edited file here. This is the specific shot that I wanted. I wanted her head away from her leg, and I wanted her almost looking over my shoulder. I didn't want her looking directly at me. I wanted her looking towards the bush, looking for prey. So the first image in the sequence, she was resting on her arm, looking around. And then the second one, her eyes were a little bit more connected to what she was looking at. I quite like the second one. The third one is very disjointed. It's her eyes and her leg are pointing towards the same direction. So I feel like this is a very unbalanced composition, and there's no real interest in her face there. This fourth one here is a little bit better. She's definitely lifted her head a bit more, and there's more separation between her head and the leg. And I like the eyes looking towards the distance. But again, I felt like because the eye and the leg was almost looking towards the same direction, it almost makes the composition feel very heavy on the left-hand side. This fifth image here, I like the balance of the composition. The eyes are looking towards the right, the leg is pointing towards the left, and these very strong diagonals in the tree also add quite a bit of flow to the composition, although the eye contact is not what I wanted and hoped for. Now this sixth image here is exactly what I was hoping for. I did crop this in, which I'll show you shortly, and I like the leg taking up quite a bit of space in the composition, but with that eye contact looking over my shoulder, with the head separated from the leg, that nice deep shadow there, really just helping to emphasize the composition a bit more. And I chose to crop out the sky on the bottom left here, which you'll see shortly. I did continue to photograph. I tried some horizontal compositions, but I just felt like they didn't work. The tree was quite messy. There was a lot of twigs that you can see sticking out here, and I just felt like that didn't work. Switched back to vertical, and I just didn't get the pose after that I was after, but I was quite happy with this one. Again, I was shooting at 600 millimeters. I did stop down to f7.1 just to get a little bit more sharpness in the eyes and the leg. If you think that the leg is a little bit in front of the plane of focus, if I had focused on the eye, I definitely wanted that to be a little bit sharper. So had I just left it at 6.3, that might not have been as sharp as I wanted. That's why I stopped down a little bit there. Obviously then stopping down, you're going to lose a little bit of that background blur, but not too much. I set the shutter speed to 1600th of a second. I could have slowed that down a little bit just to drop down the ISO and just to increase the quality of the image, but I felt like ISO 1000 was fine. I was shooting on auto ISO at the time, so that is what the camera gave me. And I left the exposure compensation on 0 because the scene was mostly in very diffused sunlight. Let's have a look at the edit here. So this is the crop. You can see I took quite a bit off the top of the image. I also took a little bit off the bottom. You can see there's a little bit of sky creeping in there. And I wanted the entire bottom of the frame to be dominated by that nice branch there. That gave the image a very nice foundation. And let's have a look at the raw file. You can see the sky behind is very bright. And through editing, I decided to try and darken that a little bit there and try and offset that with a little bit more blue against the orange of the leopard here. I really like the red nose here. That was very prominent in the raw file, and I decided to keep that quite saturated there. I also darkened down the bottom portion of this tree. That really helps just draw the attention to the main parts of the subject, and that is obviously the face and also the leg resting on the branch here. I did slightly darken down the shadow underneath the chin just to give a little bit more separation between the chin and that leg. I added a little bit more clarity into the eyes just to bring more character to the leopard and just help the viewer connect with the image a little bit more. A very slight vignette was also added, just drawing further emphasis to the face of the leopard. This third image was of a martial eagle resting in a dead tree after the sun had set, and I really loved the colors here, and I really loved the simplicity of the scene. It was just a bird in the dead tree with a beautiful bright sky behind. So I started out quite wide. You can see a little bit of trees poking in on the left bottom and also on the right here. Then I decided to zoom in a little bit, and I just felt like the bird was getting slightly lost in the composition. It was also very centered here, so I wasn't really enjoying that. Then I tried to move the bird up in the frame, but I just felt like that didn't work. Then in this frame, this is the frame that I kept, I decided to zoom in a little bit more and really help the bird dominate the frame. And through editing, which I'll show you just now, helped simplify the scene. I then switched to a vertical composition to see if I could make it work. But that bird's head was very close to the edge of this branch here. And I just felt like there was not enough breathing room for the bird there. You can see in this frame here, the bird's head is very close to the edge of that tree there, which definitely didn't work. And also there was not much of a profile of the bird. I wanted the beak to form a lot of interest in this image. I decided to try then zoom out to try get a little bit more of the tree. I really enjoyed the character of the tree, but that then introduced some of these trees at the bottom, which I didn't really like. I then tried to zoom in as much as I could to try and isolate the bird in the tree, but this bird looking towards the left just doesn't work. The face is just a little bit too close to the branch. So then I settled on this image. Because the sky was extremely bright, I wasn't going to worry about my ISO. I knew that sky would render a very low ISO, so I set my shutter speed to 1/800th of a second. The bird was very still. I handheld this shot using vibration reduction at 600mm at f6.3, and it was a very simple photo to take. I left it on exposure compensation of 0 because I really wanted to capture a nice silhouette. I wasn't too worried that the darks were very close to the left-hand side of the histogram. I mainly wanted to make sure I captured all the highlights in this image. So let's have a look at the crop. I went for a slightly more panoramic crop to this image. I cropped away that small distraction there, and also cropped away the tops of this tree. I wanted all of the branches to not end. So if I had cropped it like this, you can see that branch ends there. So I decided I'm just going to clip that off there because I just felt like it helped the composition a bit better. It formed a stronger composition in my mind. Not having the end of that tree show in the frame, I felt like worked better. The bird is very centered in the frame, but I feel like there's enough negative space in this sky on the right-hand side for it to work. The subject obviously is the bird, but it's also the tree, and that's why I'm not too worried that this bird sits center. I could have cropped this a little bit more, perhaps over here, but I felt like this space in the bottom of the frame here doesn't quite work. That's why I chose to bring in more space and just let the bird sit a little bit more center. In terms of the editing, this was a very simple shot to edit. This is the raw file. So all I did, as you can see on the right hand side here, I just increased the whites just to bring more contrast into that sky, increase the vibrance, and I just warmed up the image a little bit more with a little bit of tint there. And then I decided to drop the blacks a little bit. You can see there's a little bit of clipped blacks in this image, very small amount, but I feel like it does work in this image. I thought about perhaps bringing in some shadow detail like that, but I felt like that wasn't necessary. I felt like a striking black silhouette would work a lot better in this example. Most photographers struggle with what to do after choosing their favorite images. They're just not sure where to start with editing. In this next video, I'll show you exactly how I approach the edit on this wild dog photograph.